Yes, it is that time again where we are going to learn more about FileMaker Pro. Thanks for checking in. My name is Matt Petrowski, and in this video, we're continuing with our design, our layouts, working within FileMaker's layout mode, and we are taking a look at using grids, a very important tool. So stick with me. We'll be on my desktop in just a few. All right, so what we have for today is working with grids in this particular video. Now, as you've been watching these videos in series, then you know that recently I had released the website, or re-released the website, FileMakerThemes.com. So before we jump off into that, and yes, I'm going to show that sponsor video really quick, 15 seconds, I'm interested to know if you have visited FileMakerThemes.com. That is this website right here. I'm interested to know what you think about the website and also what you think about the pricing, what you think about the colors, the themes. What is it that would draw you to want to purchase a theme in order to save the time from having to design the theme yourself? All right, so enough said on that. What we're interested in is learning about FileMaker, and that's what we're going to do, learning grids. Like always, if you found this video as a result of a YouTube search, or if you found this video via a referral from somebody else, regardless, if you want to follow these in sequence, and this is video number 3 out of my 4th series, I've got 3 other series here on YouTube, click on the channel icon, and that will take you to my channel where you will get a listing of all of the different playlists. You can start at the first one about FileMaker's environment, go to fields and calculations, then design and structure. If you want to go all the way back, then you can certainly do that. Of course, every video is designed to give you, or every lesson I should say, is designed to give you something you can use in FileMaker. So if you'd like to follow along, I am in a copy of FileMaker 16 as I shoot this video. And the file that we're working on is this file called Time Track. And as this comes up on screen, if you'd like to access this file, you will be able to do so in the description down below. Down in the description of this video on YouTube is a link that should load this file. It's not compressed. You'll be able to get it, and right away we'll be able to work with that. So, just before we do that,
This video has been brought to you by FileMakerThemes.com. It's a one-stop shop for choosing a theme to apply to your new or existing FileMaker solution. When considering your next move toward advancing the look and feel of your FileMaker solution, don't forget to visit FileMakerThemes.com.
All right, and we're back. Thank you for bearing with that. I am trying to find a way to make it worth my time to continue to keep doing these on YouTube here, which takes a good chunk of my day. But that's not your problem, that's mine. All right, let's go through what we've got with regards to grids. So here in this file, when we go into layout mode, which I'm doing with Command or Control L, I'm going to bring up the Manage Layouts. And that's going to show right there. And as we learned in yesterday's video, one of the first layouts that I always have, and I do uncheck it so that it's not something that the user can go to, but in this case we're developing, is the theme layout. I, of course, used a theme from FileMaker Themes because it gave me a great starting point and I don't have to come up with a lot of styles. Now, the first thing that we see in this theme right here is this information, where it's the theme information, where I talk about FileMaker's grid, or the grid and info setting that we have right here. Now, if you have not worked with FileMaker's grid, or you've not worked with design grids in general, that's what we are interested in learning about today. FileMaker has 2 different settings, which is, I find interesting. There's a lot of information in the world of web design. In fact, if you look for the keyword 960 grid, over in the web, I think this was maybe 5-7 years ago or something like that, some standards came out with regards to how you design on the web. Now, grids aren't something new in FileMaker, but it's something that sort of became a little more popular with web design. I've been using grids going all the way back to when I learned advertising design working for a Yellow Page or a phone book company of all things. And a grid simply works like this. on any newspaper or a yellow page book or whatever it is, yellow pages, gosh, that dates me. You're attempting to have things in columns, and those columns create blocks of code. Now, why, or not code, but blocks of information or blocks of things. Why do we want to stay within these columns per se? Mostly because it's easier for humans to process. We are pattern recognition machines. We are always looking for a pattern. And so when you have these columns, it's very easy to recognize the separation. In fact, we do this, and I have shown this in our other videos in this series. One of the things that we do, rather than having chaos within all of our graph, you already know that I arrange things in columns. This is column 1 and everything is aligned. This is column 2 and everything is aligned. Column 3, 4, and so on. Well, this was added extra. But you can see if I have this randomly in here, just place it somewhere, it really disconcerts and makes things a little bit difficult. So we want to do the same things in our user interface, in our layouts, as we want to have things line up and use columns. So the more things that you have that are not within columns that cause these abnormalities when they're just jagged, it breaks the pattern, and for a user makes them have to decide, well, first it makes them stop, then it makes them look and decide, why is that there? Why is it out of place? So the grid helps us do that when we use the grid. So let's take a look at how it works in FileMaker. The grid is on the inspector, and it is in the first area, the position tab, and we'll shrink everything up here and look at the grid here at the very bottom. Now, the key thing to remember when you're using FileMaker's grids is this. If you set these values, which is currently set to 72 and 8 on this particular layout, when you upload the FileMaker file, that is what will initially be set every time that the file is opened and you go into layout mode. So just like we learn in the define or the manage database with regards to the tables, when we set our sorting order or our view by to table name versus custom order, or our fields when we go to field name, the grid is the same type of setting as what we have here in that manage relationship. So this value that I have in the background here of major 128, minor 32, 16, 8, 4. What you want is you want something, this is how I use the grid. There are other ways to use the grid. The major is basically your heavier line. So if I turn this to 128, this is what I'm suggesting in this theme. In fact, all of the themes I provide is pretty much this grid because it's really close to the design guidelines that Apple provides and material design. So it fits mobile, but it also works for desktop as well. Now, clearly we have to show the grid in order to see that it's on. These settings, show grid and snap to grid, they may persist. I forget if they don't. I definitely know that the values do, but snapping, whether these are turned on, every time you go into layout mode, the checkboxes may apply as well. I tend to leave them off if they do persist. I need to actually check that, because I don't always like seeing the grid. When I'm designing in the layout, I like to see what the user interface is going to look like. And we're going to learn a number of other tricks that are really helpful to be able to see what your layout looks like without having to go back and forth between browse mode and layout mode. So snap to grid turn on is something we're going to want when we're using the grid. So with this setting right here of 128, and 8, we can see the heavy lines as I zoom in here, and we can see the light lines. Now, sometimes you don't want to see the light lines. Maybe you want to have just the heavy lines, and you can do that if you simply set the major and the minor to the same value, or excuse me, to 0. You get just the major grid lines. So this is helpful, or 1 there, because yes, that's would make sense. For every 128, or every one distance of 128 pixels, we want to have only one of those show. As soon as I put 2, it splits that 128 in half, so that makes sense. So if you want the whole, you just put 1, not 0. Sorry about that. But I can set this to a much smaller value if I want to, 32, for example, and just see the major grid lines, which sometimes that's helpful, is to be able to see just the majors and not the minors. But I do use the minor grid lines myself just because I like to see the major grid lines as the columns, and then I like to use the minor grid steps with a number that will easily go into that major number. So you can see right here that I've got 32, 16, 8, and 4. Now for this particular project, what I tend to go with is 8. And then the only reason that the other values exist, the 32, 16, and 4, is so that when you're designing, you try to fit to whatever the grid is that you're using, or use the grid as your distancing reference for how you distance objects from each other. For example, let's take a field, the description right here. With the grid on, what I'm going to attempt to do is make sure when I size this, now it's snapping as I drag the object, I'm going to attempt to make this fall within some type of design guidelines. Now those design guidelines don't come just from the grid, because when you're designing with the notion of columns in conventional print design or what have you, you have these things that are in between the columns called gutters. So in this particular design, what we have right here is FileMaker doesn't implement the notion of gutters, but yet we still want to use those gutters when we are designing, and it's the minor grid that helps us do that. So for example, if I consider the columns, this major grid right here, so the whole column is this column that is 128 wide. What I'm lacking is a gutter in between that. So I have FileMaker's rulers selected right here, and you can always access those by going to the View menu and turning on rulers. Very helpful. They allow us to drag out guides. We currently have guides turned on. We can see that. We can turn on Show Guides and Snap to Guides. Both of them are probably on by default. But we can see what I'm talking about with regards to these columns and then the gutters. So the gutter in this regard, as I drag out a grid line, is going to fall right on either side of the major grid line. So the major grid line is defining, it's not defining my column, but it's defining the division of the grid that I'm going to use. So every 128, that makes sense. But my gutter ends up being whatever my minor grid is set to on either side of my major grid. So what happens is I now attempt to size my fields in between, as I take a copy of this field and say like that. And we're going to need to get rid of some of these. I know that this one can go, creation timestamp, we're not going to use that. These will ultimately be hidden. Let's start a operation cleanup here so we can start to do our design process. What does operation cleanup look like for Matt? Well, it looks like this. That was way too fast. I need to zoom out and bring that back in. There we go. It is, if you want to work with the fields or continue to work with them, just put them in the non-visible area until you determine whether you want them on or off. Yes, I can always add new copies of those fields, but this is basically, this whole area off to the side is, I consider it my staging area. But back to that grid information that we have right here. So our gutter right there is ultimately what I'm dealing with, and that happens on every major grid line. I use the minor grid lines in order to define that gutter, or that spacing between objects. Now that spacing also becomes important when it comes to the text itself within objects. Now, if I wanted to use a smaller gutter, because in this I believe my division is at 16 in this regard, or the distance from the major right here, let's zoom in, is 16 points. That should be the case. And let's check it out really quickly. That's very easy to do by simply getting a little box and dragging it out. And you can see right there, I don't know if you saw that. Did I do it too quickly? We will drag this. As I drag, you can see that each square in this case is 16 by 16. So what that means is 16 by 16 sort of becomes my magic number now. I'm now going to use 16 by 16 for the distance between text and all of its other objects, or between all of the any other thing that would surround it. So here's an example. Up here at the top where we've got this account name, well, first off, we need to take a look at this fact right here. If we're going to use the grid, then the easiest thing to do is to size pretty much everything according to your grid. So with this header right here, I can see quite clearly where it's highlighted that it's not actually falling on a minor grid line. And that's something that I would like to solve. Now, the thing that you come across when you make this type of decision is all of the math can be pretty precise. For example, in Apple's Human Interface Guidelines for Designing for Mobile, they suggest that buttons, in order for them to be the nice size for a finger or a touch event, should be 44 points high. So we go over to the inspector and we look at the position tab and we say the height of this button is currently 31. If I wanted to follow Apple, I would put in 44 because that's what they say a button should be. But sometimes, depending on what you've chosen for the grid, this doesn't always work out. So for example, this particular grid with a major and minor of 128 and 8 dictates that my body parts should be a value that is divisible into those numbers, and it happens to be 48. So if I put this on 48, that means that the part itself is going to fall right on a grid line, on a minor grid line, which is really good for me because now I can size my objects, whatever they may be, text, buttons, what have you, such that they will have a nice amount of space around them. And this is why it was either the last video or 2 videos ago, you may have said, man, why does Matt go on this rant about the fact about when text is selected that the default field for FileMaker, and let's shrink this up again, the default setting for FileMaker for all of its fields is that it's aligned to the top. Well, the reason is when you're designing for a grid, if everything is aligned at the top, you can't use the boundaries of the object itself in order to get something to center within the dimensions of the settings of the grid that you're using. Here's a case in point. With this account name object right here now, knowing that it's snapping to the grid, it is so easy for me to just go pop it up to the top, drag it down, and with it centered, the text vertically centered, I know that it's falling right within the middle of what I want to have in this top area. Now, sure, I could take the time, and maybe you already do this, I could take the time to try to place this exactly how I want, but the grid's here to help us. So with the grid and setting the object to use more than I need for displaying the text, I get this buffer area around the object. Now in design, balance is one of the primary things that we're trying to strike with all of our layout, and we're going to see that happen as we design this layout. And what I have right now is a situation where this particular object has a nice buffer on top and on bottom. And as I mentioned in the previous video, the personal space for this object is something that I don't want to violate. In other words, I don't want another object to get so close that it becomes uncomfortable. Visually, it's difficult to process when things are too close to each other. So the grid helps me define that boundary. And knowing that these blocks now represent 16, I can see that the size of this text, as I increase it maybe just a little bit, and I'm using the greater than, less than there, but it's still not falling too much out of these lines. I know that my grid, each block is representing 16. So this helps me out with yet another setting. I can, in the advanced graphic section, I can't collapse anything else, so we'll just back it off a little bit. I can now use that knowledge about the grid to give myself what I consider the perfect balance for a layout object. I would simply go into the left and put in a value of 16. So what happens now is if this object is all the way to the leftmost edge, I now get this perfect balance of this font within the space that it occupies. So I go to my design, I'm in my design and I just need to show my text, and we'll make it white right there, and we'll go into browse mode so we can see what I'm talking about, and we will zoom in. So this is something that you may be missing in your design, and this is where the grids help out so much. This object, in terms of its placement, has a really nice amount of balance. That is because the distance between here, and the distance between here, and the distance between here and here are all balanced out, and that feels good in a user interface design project. And we're going to see that as we go through a lot of other objects. For example, our button right here, the 44 pixels that Apple suggests in its human interface guidelines, and I need to check out what Material Design suggests as well. This 44 may not work very well because 48 already makes it so tight, and I really don't have the ability to align this now because it's not going to snap onto any given minor grid line. So this is where you get those other values that we have in the theme right here, the 32, 16, 8, and 4. Because these are different variations that fit within this 128, I can increase this. I think if I go to 4, no, 4 is larger. I think I want to go to 32. And that might give me what I would want to size this object to. So let's zoom in here. Oh, I'm going out. I want to zoom in. There we go. Zooming in, by the way, FileMaker took this away in FileMaker 15, FileMaker 16. Wonderful decision, by the way, if you've worked with an older copy of FileMaker. Down in the very bottom of every FileMaker file ever since I started working with FileMaker was the little magnify, I think it was 2 little mountain icons, a zoom in and a zoom out. Those were taken away in FileMaker 16 in favor of we now have full control over the window. Excellent thing. But if you want to zoom, you are going to find that right here with the command plus and the command minus, zooming in and out. The one difficulty that I find right now is now we don't know the percentage that we're viewing at when we zoom in and we zoom out, and we have to explicitly go to this actual size. There's no command key, and I've suggested to FileMaker that why don't they follow the browsers, because command 0 is what would work. This is command 0 would trigger this, and we go to actual size 100%. But let's get this button here in the right place. So we're going to snap to that, and we're going to snap to that. We can see that the size of the object now is 40. 4 pixels off of Apple's suggestion of 44. Can I live with it? You bet I can. It's still touchable on a touch design. My goal is to do a hybrid design, and that's what we're going to be doing in this series. So let's see if I've forgotten anything about the grid, because that's going to keep this video nice and right on my 30-minute mark. Snap to grid, show grid. We covered that. Major grid spacing. We covered using the grid in terms of just seeing the major and just putting a one value. Here's one thing that I can suggest. I don't currently have it open, but one of the things you're going to be using when you're going to be doing your design, and we'll talk about in another video picking your layouts. FileMaker has this option right here, which they should have made it so that this was completely user controlled, because it as devices change, FileMaker does not keep up. It's sort of like FileMaker puts in a feature and they account for the current day's devices, but then they get distracted and go work on other things in FileMaker, and they didn't really think it through. Maybe we should have just made this a list that users can save as part of their preferences file. That would have been the best way to do it, because then I could add as many as I want, not just one custom size, and then only have that one size. So they tried to account for all devices. Of course, the devices have changed now, and we really don't have the settings we want. But what I'm drawing your attention to here is, while we have iPhone and iPad, what we don't have is we don't have settings for the newer devices such as iPad Pro. So when we talk about the hybrid design that I shoot for, this notion of 768 does not work anymore. And the intersection of the two of these, I should save this for another video, which is there are the two absolute dimensions. Here's the absolute landscape, and here's the absolute portrait. The intersection right here is what I attempt to design within, meaning my design will work on an iPad whether I rotate up or rotate down. 768 used to be the target, but is no longer the target, because now if you want to design a FileMaker layout that's going to work for iPad Pros, that's because when they added in the split screen, the little bar now consumes some pixels in between, and it's a smaller value. So I will now design my design smaller in terms of size, and I don't use the device dimensions. I use the grid settings that I choose to use, and then it goes to whatever grid point will fall on a major grid point, which happens to be, in this case, this grid may be set for, in fact it is set for a 768 design. If I went to 768 right there, and I will do it based on the grid, and I will do it just shy of whatever the smallest size needs to be in order to accommodate the greatest number of devices. Wow, that was a mouthful. But I believe it's somewhere around 729. But this would become my next grid point right here, is 640, is where I would set my grid at, or the dimensions of my layout. And again, I would use that 8 with the 16 being the comfortable space around objects, and all of my parts become sized according to that. So easy, the body, if I was going to size this out, would fall on a major grid line right there. It just helps out my design. And in order to get it to fall within this boundary, everything would need to come up and be within the intersection of the two absolute dimensions of the device that I'm designing for. Woo, hopefully that made sense in terms of what I'm trying to convey in terms of using the grid. All right, so I think that's going to be good for today. 26 minutes, good timing for today. Let's switch over to the video chat here and see if we have any questions that came in with regards to, there we go, to designing and using the grid. In fact, I'm interested if you use the grid in a different way, put your feedback in the comments. Let us all learn from how you use the grid, and if there's anything that you can enhance upon with regards to what I've conveyed about the grid. If you've watched a DevCon session, I know there's been a number of them where they talk about grids, and some people just go really to the extreme with grids and have all kinds of different rules about their settings. But I think this is a pretty simple way that I use the grid. Have you any themes using Open Sans? I can create some themes. In fact, I've been thinking about the themes currently. They're limited to one font, and I'm thinking, since I'm there, I should just make the one theme with the colors work with all fonts, like all standard fonts, some platform specific, Mac only versus Windows only, and some cross-platform. And I'd probably start with the cross-platform, and when you get a theme, it would come with 3 fonts or 4 fonts or 5 fonts, Tahoma, Verdana, all of your standards. But then Open Sans, I will look at that. In fact, cool videos coming up about working with cross-platform fonts. All right, comment. Is the WS is amazing, price is high for me. Okay, cool. Good to know about the pricing. If 80 is too high, then I'll end up reducing the price. All right, comment. Would be nice to add the option of choosing a background pattern in themes. Example, chalkboard. Jean-Pierre's wanting to jump ahead to lessons that I have coming up where I show integrating patterns and images into your design, into the layout itself. There are so many things that we need to know about working with FileMaker's layouts with regards to making it look pretty. We had to start with the grid today. We create backgrounds sometimes using native themes and just copying the border to the body. All right. So it looks like we've got some discussion about a video that's going to be coming up. So if you are still watching, those of you that are live probably are, and if you're watching this after the fact, there will be a video coming up that's probably what we'll do tomorrow. We'll talk about layout parts and how they impact your design, how to use them, what you need to know about them when you're going mobile versus desktop, and also how do you integrate patterns and images so that your design looks really cool. And we'll take a look at that. Question, what fonts are best for printing? That usually depends on the output device. We're not using dot matrix printers anymore, but and most of the time it's laser, but mono-spaced fonts, if depending on the information. Otherwise, most of the time, your standard Helvetica and Arial work really good unless you need something creative. If you go do a search on the web, you'll find all kinds of different things about, use the word typography instead of font sometimes, typography design, or choosing those types of things. That's what I do. I just do a Google search. And yeah, I was referring to the themes with regards to those. Oh, okay, comment, would be nice to add an option of choosing a background pattern in themes. Gotcha. Well, I'm going to show you how to do that yourself. So yeah, I'll show you the themes. as I provide them, since I can't anticipate all of the different possible images, what I'm going to show you is how to integrate your own images and how to optimize them and how to also add patterns and really make a design look really cool. Most of the themes over at FileMaker Themes are just designed to save the tedious aspects, but if people want design elements, I can definitely add those in as well. All right, so I think that's going to give us a wrap. Ooh, nice clean 30 minutes on today's lesson. So I will take your feedback and your advice, and as always, I hope this has helped you out. You know, one quick thing before we go, let me show you something. If you are interested in learning more about FileMaker, here on these videos, I'm doing everything I can in order to give you information that's valuable, but I certainly can't cover it all. I am going to be releasing, there was a question a while ago about how do I set up security so that I can escalate people in terms of their privilege sets, and can I make a manager privilege set, and that manager can set other people to managers, but people can't set themselves to managers. If you're interested in that type of stuff, when I get notions of what's going to be good and things that I should cover over at the FileMaker magazine site, that's what I do. So this is a file that I have. It's not on the website quite yet. Of course, if you're watching this after the fact, and as a replay, it's already there. Changing user privilege sets. So if you want to know how to advance users from a lower level to a higher level of access with regards to privilege set, you're going to be able to find this type of content over at FileMakerMagazine.com. So that's just a short little pitch there with regards to one of the ways that I continue to be able to provide free content here. So, all right, enough of the promos. Let's wrap it up. So thank you very much, and you know what is coming. If you've seen any of my other videos and you like to subscribe, you can be notified via YouTube. They've got a great mobile app. You can do that by clicking the link right there. Otherwise, the next video in this series will be coming up right there. Always feel free to give me your comments and feedback down below or on any video, and much luck to you. And until next time, happy file making.